Hi, Mike. I'm here if you're good to see everybody.
Thanks, Gail. We're just giving folks a few more minutes to join before we get started. We have plenty of time built into the agenda. So I recommended to Victor and CMF team, let's allow another 2 or 3 minutes just to allow people to get connected. And I think we have most of our presenters now. So I think we're in good shape in that regard.
Mike, what do you think? We should start?
Sure, Victor. We could get started. I think we have a good group of large number of participants. Almost all of the presenters are here. Atul will be joining us soon, but everyone else is here and ready to go. So please.
Hey, Mike, I might just be doing a for Atul, but if he shows up, he shows up. It's early for him. Just let you know.
Yep. Okay, great. Thanks, Sean.
Well, thank you, Mike, and good morning. On behalf of the CMF, I would like to welcome everyone who's joining us today for this webinar about the OpenID Foundation's work on technical standards. My name is Victor Andrade, and I'll be moderating this session. As many of you know, the financial service landscape is evolving rapidly, and interoperability, security, and privacy have become critical issues. This is where the FAPI security profile comes in, which builds on widely used standards for authorization and authentication on the internet, namely OAuth and OpenID Connect, in order to provide a framework for secure access to financial data while ensuring privacy and security. This is particularly relevant in the context of financial information exchange through open finance systems. As some of you are aware, the recently published General Rule 514 of the CMF establishes the common rules of the Chilean open finance system, including the technical standards that entities should follow when implementing the relevant APIs. Compliance with the FAPI 2.0 security profile is part of this technological stack, and participants are required to accredit a proper implementation before the CMF. The specifics of FAPI 2.0 implementation and the certification requirements will be duly detailed in the technical annex of the aforementioned General Rule. Today, we are privileged to have esteemed speakers from the OpenID Foundation who will give us an insight into FAPI 2.0, the OpenID Foundation's role in the development and the certifications processes for organizations wishing to implement these standards. We also know that responding quickly and accurately to security threats is a challenge. So certainly in distributed, federate, and other types of interoperable systems. So a look at the work of the Shared Signals working group will also be part of the event. At the CMF, we know that it's particularly important to learn about the experiences of other jurisdictions that are ahead of us in this path of open finance. So today, we will also have the opportunity to learn more about the experiences of implementing security profiles in Brazil from a representative of Open Finance Brazil. In conclusion, this is an excellent opportunity for us to deepen our understanding and explore the critical role that technical standards will play in shaping our current and future financial ecosystem. Before we begin, I would like to briefly introduce our speakers. Gail Hodges, who is the OIDF Executive Director, Mark Hain, the OIDF Technical Director, Mike Lesh, OIDF Operations Director, Joseph Heenan, OIDF Specification Specialist and Certification Director, Domingos Criado, the OIDF Certification Team based in Brazil, Atul Tushbawala, and Chilean Odell, both co-chairs of the OIDF Shared Signal Working Group, and Elcio Calefi, CIO of Open Finance Brazil. We are also honored to be joined by John Bradley, of OIDF member and Zero Principal Analyst and Jubico. They will all give us invaluable insight into how FAPI is addressing the challenges of secure data exchange and data protection in the open finance systems. I would like to cover a few housekeeping items or points before we dive into the presentations. This session will last approximately an hour and a half. You are welcome to submit your questions in the chat as we go along. And if you feel more comfortable, please type your questions in Spanish so we can translate them or handle for the speakers. And at the end of the presentation, as the agenda shows, we will have a special Q&A segment where we'll put your question for the speakers. Without further ado, I would like to hand over the virtual floor to Mike to begin today's presentation.
Great, thanks, Victor. Before Gail starts, I just wanted to highlight, we also have Joseph Heenan, with OIDF specifications specialist and certification director with us today as well. Victor covered most of the housekeeping topics. I'll also just note that, as I noted it both in the chat, but also at the bottom of the agenda here, that the workshop is being recorded. We publish, the OpenID Foundation publishes all of our workshops, including the actual presentation, to the OpenID Foundation website. So we'll do that later today or tomorrow. I'll be providing all those links to the CMF team so that they can share throughout the CMF ecosystem. So with that being said, I think we're ready to get started, and I'll turn it over to Gail Hodges now. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mike, and definitely thanks to Victor and the CMF team. It's been a pleasure to work with the Chilean community, and we are delighted to take part in this webinar today and share some of our learnings with you. So I'll share a few headlines on the OpenID Foundation to kick us off. So in terms of the OpenID Foundation, we are an open technical standards body. Our vision is to help people assert their identity wherever they are and to lead the community in developing standards for this identity domain space. Billions of users use our standards every day across millions of applications. The kind of key use cases include open data, which is clearly the focus of our conversation today, but also other areas of login, open health, digital identity, and shared signals, a couple of which we'll also touch on during the course of the conversation. We have many illustrious board members and brand name organizations that are part of our board, as well as some other organizations where the logos might not be obvious to you, including the Chicago Advisory Group, which coordinates all the work for open finance in Brazil. We're delighted to have them, as well as another ecosystem, Connect ID in Australia, along with many other experts to help guide the work of the OpenID Foundation. The government partners that we work with, Chile is in amongst very good company with other countries with whom we collaborate across our families of standards. But obviously many of those we work with more closely are the ecosystems working on open banking and open data, and that choose the FAPI standard and that want to collaborate on things like our certification program. So move on the next page. Yeah, so very briefly, we have several hundred members in full, many corporate members, as well as on the next page, we also have a great spectrum of government and nonprofit members. Altogether, our operating model is we're roughly about 1/3 supported by membership, which is optional to have membership. There's no fees for contributing to our technical specifications and to be a contributor or a participant in our working groups. The other third of our revenue comes from certification, which we try to price to be as approachable as possible for people to take advantage of the certification program. And we also have some directed funding, which helps support special projects that serve the community as a whole, such as developing new test suites or strategic relationships with different ecosystems. Can you move on? Great. So just a few high-level themes. So in terms of our contribution, our IPR agreement, the key objectives for anyone who's taking part in our standards is that we create a safe space that everyone can benefit from. So everyone signs up to the same legal agreements, so everyone can take advantage of the safe spaces that creates. We also have membership, which is not limited to those corporate members, but that we try to make, again, as approachable as possible for individual contributors, as well as for governments and nonprofits. And then our board members, many of them are elected by the community, and others contribute as sustaining members. We can move on. All right, without further ado, or we're ahead of time, over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Gail. Can you guys hear me all right? I'm actually outside of my normal environment, so I just want to check that the audio is working.
We can hear you
Good.
fine,
I
Mark.
got a thumbs up from Mike there, thank you. So yeah, one last thing I want to add to the kind of membership makeup, which I think is ably demonstrated by our contribution to this event today, is our very global nature. So I'm speaking to you from Scotland at the moment. Gail and Mike are in the US, Joseph's in Scotland. I guess I would imagine that LCO is in Brazil at the moment, and we've got many others from other places. Quite a significant proportion of our membership actually are in Japan as well. So we're a very diverse community in that regard, and try to serve the global community as a whole, rather than by being focused in any particular geography. But moving on to the bit I'm supposed to be talking about, which is the workgroup context. So what I've got here is, of course, John Bradley and Chile. How could I forget? The working group context. This isn't the complete set, but this is the most active ones in the recent year or so, where we have a broad variety of focuses. Some are very focused on kind of like security side of things. In particular, FAPI would be the one to point at there. Others are looking at more generalized concerns like AD Connect, which covers a range of things. That's the home of OpenID Connect Core, but also something which I'm going to touch on shortly, called OpenID Federation. You'll hear more about the Shared Signals working group, and those are the three that we're going to be focusing on today. But we have a range of other functionally focused ones like the EKYC and IDA working group, and the Auth-Zen working group, and the Digital Credential Protocols working group. And then ones that are more focused on industry verticals, with Moderna, for example, being focused on the mobile network operator space, and ICO being focused on public sector cases. But as I say, we're going to focus on some of the activities in the AB Connect working group, the FAPI working group, and Shared Signals today. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, before we move on, sorry, there was one other little detail I wanted to call out there. At the core of the OpenID Foundation, we also have obviously our core mission and vision, which we review on a regular basis. We have the ability to perform and engage with security analysis teams, most notably at the University of Stuttgart, where we have a really strong relationship. It's the core services that the conformance and certification team provide, and the stability that's provided by a strong set of policies that are enforced. And in order to, as Gail said, make it a safe place, but also to ensure stability for the users of our various specifications going forward. So next slide, sorry, Mike. So drawing out the focus areas, I just wanted to highlight some of the specifications that each of the three focus working groups that we're covering today covers. I've already mentioned OpenID Connect Core and OpenID Connect Discovery, which are the basis of a lot of the work we've done in open banking. There's also OpenID Connect Dynamic Registration, which is used in some jurisdictions, and the very active work going on around OpenID Federation, all of this under the AB Connect working group. But they have a huge number of specifications that have been developed over the years. That being the original core working group for the OpenID Foundation. In more recent years, although it's been going for probably 6 years or 7 years now, the FAPI working group has been looking at least originally, financial services use cases. but it's turned out that the work we've done in that space is actually about sensitive data and high risk services. Hence why FAPI is now serving needs in industries wider than financial services. We certainly know of identity systems, generalized identity systems, sorry, and healthcare systems that are using the work of the FAPI working group as well. We've got the already final FAPI security profile, part 1 baseline and part 2 advanced, and those are largely what the open banking ecosystems that already are mature are based upon. And we've got the almost now complete work on FAPI 2 security profile and FAPI 2 attacker model. We are a matter of weeks away from taking that to final with any luck. And indeed, I was talking with the chair of that working group this morning about the final steps necessary to push that into membership vote. Again, there's a number of finer grained details there about the specifications that have been developed in that working group. And then finally, in terms of the focus working groups that we're covering today, I'm sure Atul and the others will talk in more detail about what the Shared Signals working group has been up to. But their main products are the Shared Signals Events Framework, the Continuous Access Evaluation Profile, and the Risk Profile, which I'll let those guys give you more details on what that's about when their time comes. Next slide. Yeah, so again, calling out that we have very mature security analysis and conformance testing performed most notably on, or available on most notably the FAPI profiles. And in particular, the FAPI 2 profile is now all available. And one more click, Mike. And a work in progress around other specs that are particularly relevant here. So OpenID Federation has got conformance and security analysis in plan, as has the Shared Signals and Events Framework spec. So moving on, I think. So in this part, we're going to talk about potential interoperability gaps that can exist. So thinking of the existing ecosystem in the United States that we've been, yeah, sorry about the background noise. So the interoperability gap that we see existing in the US market right now, that's something that we've been talking with US and Canadian regulators and other stakeholders about at some length. And the diagram we see here essentially shows us a model where the bank interfaces are made easier to integrate for the fintechs through aggregators in the current marketplace, where it doesn't have a centralized set of policies or governance at the moment. So it may be that some of these lines on this diagram could be FAPI 1 or FAPI 2 or some other profile of other protocols. But it's effectively a diverse set that it would be challenging for a small fintech, especially with the size of the US and Canadian market. If we move on, Mike, it should be available. So if the aggregators are taken out of the equation for whatever reason, it may be because of regulation or because the market moves in that direction, then the consequence on the fintechs could be the significant amount of integration work to be done on a per bank basis. And that seems to be a significant problem for the scalability of an ecosystem. If there's a lot of banks, then that could be a significant amount of cost and complexity that would need to be handled by the smaller organizations in the ecosystem. And it seems unlikely that you would get a consistent model being deployed from a consumer or a fintech's perspective. I'm not going to go into all of the details behind this. You guys can obviously delve into the detail on these slides as after the fact. So the next item. If we are able to deliver a single protocol and profile across an ecosystem, then the cost and complexity. Yeah, I could try leaning in. I don't know if that's helping. I see your comment. Thank you, Ivan. Is that working better? Ah, okay. You just need to put up with my big face. So in this final diagram, this would be an example of an ecosystem where we have a consistent protocol and profile that enables the fintechs to effectively do one code base that integrates with all banks. And although there is some side effects of that, among those being potentially the maintenance of a single standard for our banks and fintechs, and potentially some challenges with change management going forward. From an operational perspective, this is much better from a fintech perspective, and as a consequence, quite probably much better from the perspective of end consumers as well. So I think we'll go to the next slide, Mike. Yeah, and I think that, yeah, that's the end of my presentation for now. I'm going to be coming back in a short while to cover another topic.
Thanks, Mark. Dominguez. We're very fortunate to have Dominguez Credo with us today. Dominguez is part of the OpenID Foundation certification team based in Brazil. We'll talk about our work in Brazil in more detail later. Dominguez is also a contributor to the FAPI working group. So Dominguez, over to you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mark. So I would take a step back and trying to better understand, make it clear what is the value proposition of FAPI, what we are trying to achieve with that. What's the we need to start back with what's the OpenAPI challenge that are faced today. So I think it's quite clear for everyone. That's the idea for this OpenAPI, meaning that customer going to interact with our products and service through third party, right? So we have introduction of this third party on the relationship, and in order to reduce the risk exposure, right, for rather than going through solutions like screen scraping and stuff like that, the financial institution, the healthcare industry needs to start exposing open APIs and document developer portals for third party having access to the customers' data. And in order to reduce the risk exposure, we want to make sure that the protocol that's backing the actual APIs have a high secure and it's quite interoperable. Otherwise, it's going to be an ad hoc solution per integration that's happening, right? It doesn't scale, and usually that's the path that we are going to looking forward. And so that's the main goal for the FAPI, right? Can you go to the next slide? So, and if you look at the landscape over the last 6-7 years, so if you look at the rollout, everyone goes after that, and then if you look at it quite close, you see that, okay, that's a framework with a bunch of options, and you can do it in very different ways. The implementation of your APIs and how you're going to secure the many options that are available, which as many options are available, probably that's going to be really hard for interoperability, as well as a side effect of it that you might choosing options that might not deliver the actual security that's going to be required for the OpenAPI. Meaning specifically on the banking industry, right? So when we talk about exchanging financial details of customers or and doing payment, we want the APIs to be open, but in order for merchants or point of sales starting a payment process, but we want to be as tight as we can in order to avoid social engineering scams and stuff like that, right? That's the crux of the main challenge that it's imposed to financial industry, as well as healthcare industry, as you name it, many other industry right now through this open API. Can you go to the next slide? So what the working group, the FAPI working group, main goal is to create a general purpose high security profile for this. The idea is to extend and all the different protocols that we have, leverage all of them in order to create a very interoperable and high secure standards. We work closely with many, as Gail said, many different regulators. We've been working, and we are very close, cooperating with everyone, and in order to achieve. As Gail mentioned, you're going towards. We have the OpenID Connect already as a standard. We're also working hard, fiercely on getting the FAPI as well as a standard. That's the main idea, right? We see a spectrum of different jurisdictions already adopting it, but we see it's onboarding, right? So yeah, you can go to the next slide. That's fine. So what is FAPI, right? So, and what is that? As the open APIs, you have very many different functional APIs. Every domain has a specific format and features and problems, right? There's a payload that needs to be addressed. That's going to be very specific to each domain that we are addressing, and that's the part that we don't addressing, right? So we are not also addressing the connectivity part, right? Because the network itself, how that works, the PKI infrastructure, everything is not there. What we address, what FAPI is the connectivity including the security, right? So how parties will interact and how parties will authenticate itself and how the authorization piece will happen. We also address more stuff on FAPI related to how, for instance, how the non-repudiation of parties will also happen. That's going to be required, but we are agnostic to the payload itself. That's the idea. That's why we dropped the idea of the financial grade API in favor of FAPI, because we noticed that, okay, multiple domains can benefit from FAPI. You name it, whatever you can think of nowadays. One other aspect is that we also address a lot of the customer experience, right? Because as the interaction through a third party happens, you need also to ensure that there's a coordination and a choreography between the actual third party, the actual resource owner or the customer in our case, and the bank in the case of the financial institutions, that are being done in order to ensure that there's no actually attack surface or any gap on security that's not being addressed. What FAPI does is specify some of the requirements for that and shed some light on how that needs to be done, but we ain't going to specify how actually this needs to happen, right? So what is the journey from the banking industry, how the payment journey happens? That's ain't going to be defined by FAPI. We try to be as agnostic as we can for that, and but also lay the foundation for being secure. Another part of this tripod is towards the governance, right? We have extensively test rate for testing many aspects of the FAPI, and many different options are available, and all of them are tested. We make it available and for everyone on the public domain, and even open source, so you can grab all the tests that we have that are available on GitLab, fully available, and you can run it on your infrastructure. What we do, we provide test rate for validating if the FAPI is properly implemented, but we don't dictate how the ecosystem are done or the governance, how government should be required or mandated, don't mandated, or the policy that would be governing the ecosystem. That's out of our realm. We don't address that, as you're going to hear later from Elsie. All right. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay. I'll try to be very brief here and try to describe what's the FAPI 1 and FAPI 2. You might have heard that there's one FAPI and FAPI 2. What are the main difference is that FAPI it has been started back on 2016, and the idea back then was to create a high interoperable framework and secure using the existing tools and products that are available on the market. That was the main idea. That has driven the design of FAPI 1. The idea has they try to minimize the creation of new standards, but many seeds has been implanted by them, and many options has been created for the ecosystem. So if you have been looking at closely to our certification page, you might see many different options for FAPI 1. Using JARM, not using JARM, using PAR, not using PAR, using private key, or using MTLS, whatever, right? So there's a bunch of options. On FAPI 2, we have, as the time has gone by, a lot of the specs have been seeded. The discussion has been seeded on the working group, has flourished into new standards that has been adopted through the products, which means that that's allow us to, the working group, to redefine FAPI 2, simplifying, being more opinionated on the requirements for the standards that needs to be backed, that can be used as the foundation for this protocol, and a new standard has been arisen. Also, on the ITF, the OAuth 2 best practice document has been working. A lot of experience from many different security incidents that happened through the years, where attackers used OAuth, right? So we learn from that, we incorporate that, and we create a more nimble spec that's more lean and more compact. That's going to be that now we call it FAPI 2. Right. So go to the next slide, please. Okay. So what is the common building blocks of FAPI 1 and FAPI 2, right? So there's a strong support for complex authorization requests on it. We also have some that we're going to describe some of the specs that are backing it. Also going to describe also the sender constraint access token. What's the difference, right? So that's not quite, we don't see quite often people using it, but that's something we also use as the building block for the FAPI 1 and FAPI 2. Non-repudiation support, a lot of jurisdiction requires that, right? To provide some mechanism for non-repudiation support. We also have all of the FAPI 1 and FAPI 2 address all known attacks, and also having formal verified, as Mark mentioned. And the conformance suite has been implemented for both FAPI 1 and FAPI 2, right? Can you go to the next slide, please? So if you look at what I mean by the complex authorization request support, there's some specs that are backing it. Try to not be too technical on it, right? Because it might be around another long discussion. What is, for instance, one spec that have been eroded through the years, now it's quite well established, is PAR, push authorization request. So the idea here is that different from OAuth, where the client starts the authorization request and through exchange data through the front channel. Now with PAR, that allows the clients or third party to pre-provision on the infrastructure, on the servers, what's the actual authorization request. That simplifies and reduces minimizing the actual data being transferred on the front channel, and reducing a lot the temper, a lot of different attacks that might happen, right? So that's also being there. That allows also to more complex data to be transferred. And can you go to the next slide? The other spec that is in conjunction with PAR that can be used is what we call HAR, Rich Authorization Request. So you see now, as other jurisdiction, as you have seen, using the idea of the concept of consent, that can be incorporated now in FAPI 2 as using, for instance, Rich Authorization Request, which is a schema, a kind of meta schema for JSON payload to be transferred through the authorization request, allowing more, for instance, the consent to be represented as part of the authorization request, right? That meta schema defined by the rich authorization request sets some basic ground for representing more data structure and complex, like for instance consent. You see some jurisdictions that already adopting HAR in order to transfer the consent back and between third party and the financial institutions. Right? Can you go to the next slide, please? Right. So also related to the authorization request, we see additional features that have been incorporated on FAPI 2 as the OAuth security best practice document has been evolved. So, for instance, the requirement for Pixie, the requirement for strict verification or matching the redirected URIs and stuff like that. Many different attacks has been addressed by this, and yeah, that's it. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, there's also for representing the actual authorization, the FAPI 2 also has another spec, which is part of the working group, which is the Grant Management API. Grant Management API allows the actual consents or grants to be represented and incorporated on the authorization request directly without requiring a proprietary API to be defined for representing those consents. That's the idea. You have a set of different operations on it. You have already some jurisdictions evaluating it for being adopted, but that can be as many components on the FAPI. That's one of that can be optional and implemented or not, right? Can you go to the next slide? Another authorization request, another authorization format that's been supported by FAPI is CIBA. CIBA is a different approach where rather than going directly through front channel, we allow the authorization process to be disconnected, allowing two different endpoint or two different terminals, I would say, two different devices to be used for the authorization. So you see some of the companies have created proprietary protocol for creating that kind of thing, but CIBA is now has fully support of FAPI, so which means that you can implement that kind of scenario quite securely and fully authenticating with all no repudiation requirements in place. That's the main. Can you go to the next slide? Okay. Now, center constrained access token. That's one of the main difference between the FAPI and the OAuth, where you see. Can you go to the next slide, please? The idea of center constraint, usually when you look at the OAuth, when the discussion from the OAuth came along, you have the notion of the bear token. The idea that the bear token is the holder of the actual token can present that and act as we assume that's going to be the proper audience that was supposed to be sent, right? But the difference between the bear token and the center constraint is that now you have on the token itself, you have some mechanisms for validating who that's supposed to be. So the difference, as you can think of, okay, one is the occurrence in the place and passport. For instance, on the passport itself, you have some more details describing it, and the holder of it needs to be validated through the document of the data that's incorporated on the token itself. That's the idea. Can you go to next slide? There are two different specifications backing it that are now available on FAPI 2. The first one is mutual TLS. It is available since FAPI 1, and in fact, is the only option on FAPI 1. So the PKI infrastructure for the ecosystem is the backbone for when the bank, for instance, issue a token, it can correlate the token with the actual client certificate that has been used for the connectivity, which means that now when the client present the same token to a function API, we can validate that the token is tidy. It's specific to the actual TLS tunnel that is it was created, right? So and then we can, given the client certificate, we can verify that is this access token valid for this client certificate that has been used. Okay, if that's the case, cool, go for that. Right. Otherwise, it's might be a token that has been probably stolen or what. The other one is toward Depop. It's a new protocol. It's quite a new one and quite much more simpler and can be used for protecting access token. The other building blocks of FAPI, no repudiation support. There's some specs backing it on FAPI 2. Can you go to the next slide, please? Like some of them. The first one is JAR. JAR meaning that when third party will start the transition process, it will sign the actual payload. Then you can verify on the other side, right? So and then you can store it for audience perspective. The JARM is the response for when the bank authorizes a third party to have access. The payload is signed by the bank, so the third party can store it for the audience for auditing. There's other specs incorporated on FAPI 2. The other one is token introspection. When third party checks if the token is valid on the bank, the bank can respond with the actual payload signed. And the other one is the HTTP signature. That's for tracking purpose, that the actual third party, when accessing a function API, it comes from the actual third party, and then the bank can store the actual headers for auditing purpose. Can you go to the next slide, please? Non-attacks been addressed and formal verifier, right? So that's something Mark has been mentioned. Can you go to the next slide? Right. So has been formal, FAPI 1 has been formal verified. So a formal validation meaning that the structure of the protocol has been mathematically modeled and have been formally verified, which means that through math engineering, right? So we can validate that every path on the protocol has been properly implemented and there's no gap between that. Can you go to the next slide, Mike? FAPI 2 is under review, so it's already published. So you can find details on the OpenID Foundation website, as well as on the papers that have been published by Stuttgart University, where they have validated the FAPI 2. Can you go to the next slide? So what does that mean, right? What does it mean when we say it's formal verified? It means that the protocol itself has no error on the protocol. What I mean by that is that you ain't gonna see in the future attacks happening because of the lack of any feature on security on the protocol itself. That's what it means. For sure, there are many other components on the ecosystem. There might be breaches and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean that the protocol itself is broken, right? That's the idea. So you can rest assured that on the long run, the protocol itself will still remain safe. You go to the next slide. The working group progress, there's 2 white papers out there. You can find those on the OpenID Foundation websites. The formal analysis, as I said, right? So it's under review. You can find that on our website. The more to come on the actual other specifications backing FAPI 2 for the umbrella of FAPI 2. It's going to be also be published soon. Related to certification, we have full complete FAPI 1 certification. The FAPI 2, it's been we are close to publish it, but I think Joseph will cover that. Can you go to the next slide? I think I'm done. Yeah, I'm planning what's going to be our roadmap. But yeah, see, by the end of this year, probably everything's going to be completed and reaching to the final draft. Thank you. Go next
Thanks,
slide.
Dominguez. I think that was it. So shall we just do a quick pause there to see if there's you covered a lot of content. Obviously FAPI central.
Yeah,
to
sorry,
this,
I threw a lot of stuff.
No. I thought it might just be good. Just we could pause just for a minute to see if there's any questions on FAPI. We certainly can come back to the topic. Excuse me, at the end during the general Q&A session. I'll just highlight as Dominguez mentioned that FAPI 2 is close to going to the 60-day member review process. So final specifications are required to go through a 60-day member review. After the member review, then it's a 14-day member vote. So we're certainly on track to having the FAPI 2 final spec published by the end of the year. In fact, the FAPI working group is currently meeting to work through the final open issues so that hopefully we can get that published soon. So I'll just pause there. Victor, I'm noting that there, oh, that's just an announcement. I'm sorry. I thought that was a question in Spanish in the chat, but is there any questions before we move on to the next presenter?
Hi, I'm Patricio Valenzuela. I work in a financial institution, and I would like to ask to Domingos about the attacker model for FAPI 2.0. How does the attacker model complements, or what role has the attacker model related to the security profile?
Yeah, so the attacker model was we have to find it, and it's the formal analysis is based on the actual attacker model. So which means that the attacker model behind the scene that drives the whole security, what we are trying, what's it's going to be incorporated on the protocol. The formal review models the protocol, and based on the attacker model that describe all the path that the attacker might use for attacking the protocol. That's the idea of the attacker model. Does it make sense?
Let me just interject, if I may, Domingos. I was just looking at those slides. I'm thinking something's not quite right. I think they might be older slides. All of the FAPI 2 family of specifications have gone through the security analysis now. So we have all of the reports completed by Stuttgart. So I'm just going to do a quick look while we're on the line here, and I'll post those reports for the benefit of the community here.
Thanks, Gail.
Yeah, so sorry, Gary, yeah, you're correct. So everything's already done. What we're doing is right now is on the stage of we are reviewing it on the working group. So we need to figure out if there's any be incorporated on FAPI. As far as we have seen, yeah, everything looks good.
And
We can't hear you, Victor.
And now I think I reopened the microphone. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Yeah,
Yes, Victor.
Just a quick question. Domingos said in the presentation that grant management could be used to design consent dashboards. And in fact, or regulation or general rule and those consent dashboard, mutual consent dashboards. And if we look at the grant management document for OAuth, they present some cases and scenarios of, for instance, the Australian CDR with the data holders and data recipients. And we don't know what kind of experience do you have with this grant management dashboards, because it could be a very good implementation for system, since our rule already required such kind of solution to be deployed by either the data holders, that it will be the financial institution that owns or have the custodian the data, and the financial institutions that will require the data on behalf of the users. So if you, Domingos, or other IDF members could jump into as an example of the implementation of this grant management, it would be very helpful.
Yeah, there's some implementations already in place, and well, I had to on another provider, another vendor, software vendor called Outlet. We have already implemented that. There are other products that are implementing grant management API as well. So, but I'm not sure exactly if there's a large scale deployment experience to point that to. So yeah, I can check it and send back to you later some details.
I guess it's Roberto's raise a hand.
Yes, thank you. I'm concerned on the case when the user is acting on behalf of a legal person, and especially when you have the need to handle two seeming different persons in the process.
Yeah, that's a real challenge. I think also you can speak more on that, right? As you have legal companies being represented by more than one user. Also, the open insurance, I know that it's also a challenge for open insurance.
Have you seen a solution for that? Do you have an example to look for?
Yeah, so I think also you can shed some light. Probably, I'm not sure if you will cover that, but yeah, on the open finance as well as open insurance, you have the notion of legal entities with more than one representative authorizing.
I'm going to jump in while Elcio is able. Hopefully, Elcio will be able to go in and speak in Latin, the Brazilian context in a moment. But we have actually spotted this as a challenge as part of the work of the eKYC and Identity Assurance Working Group, Roberto. And we started preparing a spec there to address exactly that authority to act on behalf of another entity case. It's quite an early draft at the moment, and we would very much welcome contribution from people who see this problem and wish to help solve it. But it's not a mature spec yet. I actually don't know what else he has been doing, so let's hear from him as well.
Yeah, so what Mark was referring to is that the eKYC working group has defined some structure for defining the actual legal representation of it for multiple persons, right? Natural persons to an entity. You can include that as part of, for instance, your payload authorization request in order to represent that. For instance, who needs to be represented, who is going to be a part of it.
It could, for example, say that Mark Hain is authorized to act on behalf of the OpenID Foundation.
Yeah.
Let me take something of Roberto, if I understood correct the point. Here in Brazil, first of all, good morning to all. I'm Elcio. Here in Brazil, for persons, not for business, for person, we agree on the OAuth journey here that the customer is live on the channel because they have to authenticate with their all capabilities of the banks or the firm that they are sending the consent. So the customer is present on the transaction here, and for the personal purposes here. And we sent some kind of signals through the OAuth here to guarantee that the person on one side is the person on the other, to try to minimize and take the person, because they will have to authenticate on their bank. if they send the credentials or something like that to the other person, it's some kind of social engineering, not some kind of attacker model on the infrastructure. For business purposes here, we have on the side of the authorization service, some kind of power of the people. If the people has powers to approve something or something like that, this is on top of AUF, and are the capability already installed on the authorization server side of the transaction. So this should help to minimize the man in the middle or something like that. And for the payment rail nowadays, we're enhancing one more capability. That's the FIDO capability to guarantee that you will have a device of the person authenticated on the transaction too. So I try to cover a big picture of all.
But do you have also covered the case when you need two different signatures from two different people?
On the business side, on the business purposes nowadays from the company side, it's much common. Do you have two signatures here that we call powers on the side of the authorization service? But it is on the side of the authorization server. The OAuth consent stay in a wait model, awaiting that the one or n persons approve the consent of the transaction or of the payment.
That means you have standardized a way to inform the power of the users from every company to every other company.
No.
I mean, in every access server, you need to put the powers, right? And this information should be standardized in a way all the ecosystem can understand.
Let me try to give an example. For me, I and you, Roberto, are the board members of some company that we are the people that has the power to sign the consent to send our data to the relying party here. So in our standards of our company, it have to be mutual signatures, you and mine. This standard, each company has your kind of power. If 1, 2, 3 is just one, is the power of the power. And this is on the authorization server side. It's not standardized on the ecosystem because it's a politic of the institution. It's some kind of policy of the institution. This is how it is nowadays. I don't know it will be in this way in the next 2 years.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, let's pause questions. I know Naeem's got his hand raised. We'll have time at the end. We are up against some tight timeframes for some of our presenters to get through the workshop presentations. In fact, we're going to skip over the shared signals presentation just briefly so that Mark Hain can pick up the next topic, and then we'll come back to shared signals. And then once we get through the presentations, we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. So Mark, let me get you to your slides, and then we'll come back to shared signals, as I mentioned.
Thanks, Mike, and sorry for everybody to disrupt both the questions and the order of events. I am going to be getting on a plane shortly, and in my experience, they don't tend to wait for me. So, you know.
Please, Mark, you're up.
I can't see the slides, Mike. Oh,
they're showing, Mark.
Oh, I've got the wrong bit open, that's why, my bad. Okay, so in the next couple of slides, we just wanted to highlight for you a few recommendations that we've discovered through our experience of working with ecosystem implementers, and discuss the question of whether there's really a terribly big difference between what an ecosystem operator should do if they're building from a fully greenfield position, or whether they've already got some form of operational ecosystem. So the key highlights that we think are needed, particularly for new ecosystem operators, and the legislation and regulation that goes around that potentially, is that if there is indeed a regulatory framework behind this, it's not always, then having mention of a highly secure standardized communication protocol is a really important thing. We have seen many lengthy and somewhat difficult conversations in the past with both legislators and regulators about what should be in the rulings that exist. And if this particular requirement isn't put in at quite a high level, then it can cause a lot of debate within the implementers in the ecosystem. And then at the next step down, we would also quite strongly recommend that there's a very specific standardized communication protocol mentioned. Again, if that's not the case, then what often occurs is fragmentation. And there's two kind of fairly large ecosystems where we've seen that approach of not having a very highly specific protocol like FAPI 2 defined, and it has indeed led to an ecosystem where the implementers are able to make their own choices, and commercial considerations come into play that override the benefits potentially for the smaller players and the consumers in that ecosystem. And then the final kind of layer to this is making sure that there's a local profile that further defines each of the options that is available under a protocol profile like FAPI 2. Make sure that interoperability is as likely as possible from a specification profile perspective. And I would say on those last 2 points, having a local managing entity to make those rules and to ensure that those rules are actually what the various implementers deliver is quite a powerful thing. We've seen at least one ecosystem where the governing entity didn't do enforcement of any sort directly to begin with. And over time, they realized that quite tight enforcement around that was really important as well. As part of that enforcement, doing testing and certification, which is the next rule on this table, is another really important aspect. It enables everybody to really have a pretty good idea whether their implementation is going to interoperate with other parties in the ecosystem. Oh, back up. No, I think we're going forward, actually, Mike. Yeah, there we go. So things like a requirement to perform conformance and certification of some sort on a regular basis, we do see annually as quite a common pattern. And really we're looking also for monitoring to check to see if, excuse me, if things have changed in the implementations over time as well. Another key component in an ecosystem is the ability to have a dynamic discovery mechanism that enables parties in the ecosystem to more readily find out who they're dealing with, whether they're looking to discover data holders or data recipients, depending on who's requesting that, and do that in a way that is, very reliably cryptographically backed and all of those good things. And we've got a protocol well underway which hopes to standardize that rather than deliver the proprietary mechanisms that we've seen in the past. And in terms of managing change over time, the managing entity should have a program in place where there's a periodic review to see if the all of the rules, profiles, and communication protocols, and all of the other wider context is still fit for purpose, and see if there should be a plan and a roadmap for change over time. Next slide, please, Mike. So this slide's kind of full, and I'm not going to try and read through all of it, but essentially, when we look at this from the perspective of existing ecosystems, our guidance is not terribly different. Essentially, all of those things we think are still needed, whether they are components that exist or not. And really, the question becomes, how much effort and cost is it going to take to take the existing ecosystem and migrate to something which reflects all of these things? And I would say what we've seen in ecosystems in the past is that some, change at a more rapid pace than others. But ultimately, there should be a clear roadmap to get from whatever they're doing today to something which resembles the patterns that we've described here in this table. And I think what I'll let you do is enjoy that slide after the presentation, and come back to us with any questions that arise. And I think that's, oh yeah, there's just one last thing here. The other thing that didn't make it onto the first slide, but is still an important call out, is that a mechanism for communicating events on an ecosystem-wide basis, so that indications of issues at a very granular level can be done, and is quite important. There's some quite good rationale down the side there, but for me, communicating when there are indications of problems or emerging risks with a particular end customer or transaction are quite important capabilities, and it's something that we believe both new and existing ecosystems should look at. It'll allow you to do things like consider the risk relating to an end customer if, for example, their credentials have been changed since the grant was set up, or perhaps allow a relying party fintech to make a decision about whether to continue granting access to their end user if the account that was involved in the transaction originally becomes disabled or deleted. Those sorts of things, or indeed, if I'm sure Atul and Sean are going to talk more about this, potentially some other signals that imply or communicate directly that there's risk of fraud happening in a given context. But I don't want to go too much deeper into shared signals, because I know we have a presentation by the two co-authors of those specifications.
Right.
I mean, you're doing a great job. Keep going. I mean, you're selling it very well.
I was going to suggest that was a perfect transition to Sean and Atul, knowing that they're also under a tight time frame as well. So, Mark, are you good with your slides currently?
I think so. I don't think there's another one.
Okay, I think we're good then. Thank you very much, and safe travels when you drop off. Appreciate you joining from the airport.
Okay, and thanks again, everybody, for accepting my apologies for not being here for the Q&A as well. But I am happy to pick up questions that are directed my way.
Thanks, Mark. Sorry, as I work my way backwards here. Okay, over to Atul and Sean. So both Atul and Sean are both co-chairs of the OIDF Shared Signals Working Group. You heard Mark touch upon that there at the end of his presentation. So over to you, Sean, to get started. Thank you.
Hey everybody, Sean Odell. I work at Disney. I'm a senior staff security engineer, amongst other things. Atul's here as well. He's CTO of Signal and the author of CAPE. So this is his brainchild. Happy to be part of the journey on it. Atul, you want to introduce yourself, or are you okay?
Sure. Yeah, you introduced me pretty well, so thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm trying to keep this very high level to give you an example of like, what is it comprised of? How could you use it? And what are the implications and the overlap in banking and in FAPI? So high level bullet points here. It is an open standard. And when you want to start talking about zero trust, we have to figure out a way how we all communicate. So that's why this is a very interesting framework, because it's open to open interop, it's standardized, and it simplifies communications. And it's I'm not reading the bullet points line for line, but I'm trying to give you an overview of it. It is an asynchronous pub sub framework built around trust. In the next slide, not yet, Mike, sorry about saying that. I'll cover what it's comprised of. It's a very simple concept, but I think having it in a pictorial and in a diagram will help you understand it more. It's built on an existing RFC on security event tokens, so it is very much a JSON web token, a JOT. So it's not a new schema, nothing new. It's reusing a lot of things that were already used in the industry. The applicability to FAPI is the extensibility of SSF, which is what we're going to refer to that as, because shared signals framework is a long way to say SSF. So it is very extensible on purpose, and a lot of companies are already extending this to be used for custom events, which is where I think banking could really rely on this and then actually contribute back to the working group on banking type, fraud type events. So there's a little bit of a, I don't want to say a nuance here, but shared signals framework is kind of like a layer, and we layer on event types in the framework. So there's 3 event types. I know Mark alluded to CAPE and risk. CAPE, think of CAPE more like their security events, like session revocation, session established, assurance level change, which is huge in your industry. Risk is more about account based, so lateral movement, account takeovers, linked accounts, horizontal movement, which is also relevant to banking as well. SCIM is a new one. It's out in the IETF, but it's used more for provisioning coordination and like subscription. SCIM has been around for a while. This is just trying to minimize it into a SCIM event. So those are the 3 main event types that sit on SSF. Got it, Mike. Shot, man. It's like we almost rehearsed this, right? So here are the basic 5 concepts of it. So I gave a presentation on this at Identiverse in 2023, but I truly believe that shared signals is what SAML brought to the industry 20 years ago. That is something that I think is coming. It's there. Atul's blog on it when he was at Google was amazing. I read it and I was all in on it. So kudos to you, Atul, for that, for having the foresight. But the 5 main components of shared signals: a subject, an event, you have a transmitter, you have a receiver, and a stream. It is as basic as that. The purpose of this too, it's to manage access to resources, enforce access controls, and prevent malicious people from gaining unauthorized access. All the reason why this is very prevalent now. One more benefit here on the concept page is it helps organizations detect and respond to threats faster, and it simplifies your security operations and your interop operations. The one other big piece of this is this. I want to pay very close attention to the subject piece of shared signals, because there's many ways to do subjects, and we have 15 minutes here to cover it. But the spec does call out that subject can be simple, complex, aliased. Subject is one of the most important pieces of this, as is the event. So we'll cover that in the next slide coming up. But these are the 5 basic concepts. So once you understand this, the rest of it is about applicability and use cases. And I think talking to the use cases here is going to be where I think we're going to really stitch it all together. So Mike, next slide. This is something Atul put together. So again, kudos to you, Atul, for this. You're going to start seeing shared signals and an event type put together, because remember, shared signals is a framework, and I think this overlays it very well. This diagram here, you see that there is a transmitter and a receiver on both sides. That's just a stream. Kafka, Kinesis, to take your implementation pick. The asynchronous transport allows you to do this more efficiently, more quickly, and not rely on synchronous transactions. But I like the way Atul drew out the middle piece, that you have a JOT is a signed object, which is a security event token, which are events. that have messages like CAPE events for session management, for example. So in this context here, a transmitter and a receiver, I can send you a session revoked event if I see something anomalous happening in my system to you, and you can act on it as the policy enforcement point. Like you can act on it for a session revocation token right there. Atul, you want to go a little bit deeper into this, or did I cover it enough?
No, I can maybe add just a little bit. And just to clarify, I think, I have been only the new thing that I added was just the CAPE part, the shared signals part. I've really just contributed, and John here on the call is also a big contributor to it. So, want to just call him out as well. So,
All right.
what I wanted to just add to what Sean said is that if you see, the transmitter and the receiver, they need to establish a reliable way of communicating asynchronous events, right? And the only thing you have on the internet is HTTP. And so what basically shared signals framework does is enables you to provide a reliable asynchronous transport using just HTTP. And to do that, you have to do some kind of stream controls. You have to create streams. You're going to sort of pause, enable, disable streams, delete streams. All those are directly between the transmitter and receiver. That's sort of the bottom line, line at the bottom that you see. And then once you've got that stream in place, you're asynchronously sending events from the transmitter to the receiver. And each event is just a signed jot, which is also a flavor of the signed jot, which is called a security event token, which defines certain constraints on what should and should not be in a signed jot. And then CAPE further specializes that to events that are specific to session management. And like Sean was alluding in the previous slide, that's not the only application. CAPE is just one application of the shared signals framework. It could be, risk, it could be SCIM, or it could be something specific to banking that you might be interested in. Right. So yeah, back to you, Sean.
A nice segue, and you almost think that we rehearsed this, but we didn't. To the next slide. This is a great example of a use case in action. So I like to explain this as use case centric because it's gonna start to make sense. I hope you all have seen Star Wars before, and you do know that Anakin does become Darth Vader, so that's a spoiler alert right there. So one of the biggest problems in the workforce is when someone moves between jobs. And I'm using this example for a reason because of the applicability of shared signals. One event here. So like when Atul was saying, when you have that relationship established between a transmitter and a receiver that's secure, one event can translate, one workforce event, like someone changed jobs, for example, could translate into many events. For example, we could revoke Anakin's session here. We can make him change his password. We could send a SCIM event to deactivate Anakin and activate Darth Vader. We also could use a risk event that says an identifier has been changed from Anakin to Darth Vader. It sounds very simplistic from a storyboard perspective, but when you understand the applicability of shared signals and how you can reach it with events and how one action can translate into many events, you'll understand the power of why shared signals is used as a trust framework, but also as an orchestration framework. One single event, you can revoke sessions, force a password change, purge accounts, and enable new ones. From a banking perspective, the overlay could be, I want to send money to someone. So, okay, you have noticed that someone's sending money to A and to B. You could take so many actions there and know that I have done a ledger example where if I'm sending money over and it's been accepted by the right party, now you have a way to link a transaction together using a standard framework, which is a great segue to the next slide, Mark. Please. Mike, sorry, Mike, not Mark. I want to point out here that this is less about enforcement and more about using the framework for trust and for information sharing. So you'll notice here that the use case is someone's accessing new systems. Not that big of a deal, but on the right-hand side of the slide, there's potential cases. There's case one is it's indicative of risk. So that could be taken as I will be prescriptive on that action and revoke someone's session or respond accordingly, for example. The blue box is essentially saying like, thank you for the information. But again, how they got the information over was via shared signals in an event. This could be a custom event that you create. It could be one that you can contribute back to the industry. But let's say, for example, that I say, hey, Anakin is doing something risky. Awesome. I will watch that behavior, but I'll add it as a potential risk vector and keep an eye on it. The bottom box, the green one, is more like an information. It's an inform, but it's still using shared signals framework. It's, hey, Anakin accessed the Jedi archives. It's 9 a.m. Anakin usually comes to the office at 9 a.m. Great. It's an indicator point. Now, from a banking perspective, I think this goes very well with like conveying transfer settlement confirmations. It's a way to be prescriptive, informative, and reconciled in one approach. And you could do this with one token. Because if you're a transmitter and a receiver, I can say, hey, transmitter bank, I've sent this. Receiver says, thank you, I've got it. I'm letting you know that it was done successfully. That way you have two entities saying the transaction has been done and it's correct. Atul, did you want to go any deeper on that, or did I mean, we can go, I can talk about this for 4 hours if you wanted me to.
No, I think you made the points very well. I would just like to add that this is an interesting thing about shared signals, is that it doesn't really force any certain particular behavior. So you're free to choose your own policies when you receive an event. It's more what we call descriptive than prescriptive. But you can, of course, come up with a set of rules as a consortium of bankers that, like, hey, when any one of us receives a certain event, we have to do this. That's up to you, because that's sort of something that you can use shared signals in order to enforce your own sort of policies as a consortium or individually as participants in that consortium.
And I want to give an example here. There's I think it's login.gov in the US. They have already extended this for things like identity lockout and identity fraud. Now they have their own custom schema, but it still adheres to the framework. So like, I wish you had more time for this, but if you look into the actual event payload, they have their own claims in that JOT token, but they have done internally as the government to say, this is what identity fraud looks like. Here are the claims, here are the values, and then here's what identity lockout looks like. I'm reading the question now in chat, so I probably shouldn't do that. Sorry, Mike.
I can address the questions afterwards if you want. I know you're on a tight time.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, we're really tight on time, so if we can cue that up at the end, that'd be great.
Hey, Sean, so let me show you some example, for instance, on the open banking in Brazil, if I may. For instance, you might have, for instance, the using share signal. If you want to, for instance, the bank itself sharing an event through SSF for the fintech that has an access token, for instance. Let's say you detected the network has changed, you want to revoke or reduce change the actual consent or revoke the consent, like something like that, right? And the share signal allows you to create the foundation for properly representing and exchanging that data without incurring to custom endpoints that needs to be created through multiple parties, right?
You hit it nail on the head. You're absolutely correct. And I wanted to add this in. So Mike, I apologize, but I was talking to OpenID in Japan, and they have almost a similar use case where they're implementing telco and banking together. So if they see that you're something's weird on like when you log into your telco and you either have been on have I been pwned database, or your password's been pwned, or it looks suspicious to you, they will make, now this is in the country of Japan. In the banking perspective, they want to make your login be WebAuthn, no more password. But again, to Atul's point, that is a descriptive signal with a prescriptive policy. So the telco says, this looks weird. The banking is saying, thank you for that information. I am now going to take this person's account in banking and make them identity proof, re-enroll in WebAuthn, and use no more passwords, because they want to protect their consumers. It's very similar to the use case you said, but it's the cross boundaries between domains like banking, telco, security, and identity. Shared Signals was made for this because it's like you said, Yves, you don't have to make proprietary APIs. It's, can you read a JOT token? Let's talk. So very well said.
Anything else, Sean, Atul, for now?
I mean, I could answer Nem's question if you would like.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and do that? And then if you can keep that brief, Atul, apologies, and then we'll get to the next presentation. Thank you.
So, Nem, your observation is correct that the current implementations focus more on the authorization and access control kind of use cases, right? But we are continuing to see interest in different areas, and banking is one of them. Like Sean mentioned that we got a certain amount of interest from Japan from the banking side of things, and others. And there's evidence that individual sort of consortiums are trying to form around different use cases. Like for example, some identity providers in the US are working with device endpoint management and security companies to define device related risk events that they can use to decide access based on their identity provider, right? So this is a slightly different use case than what we've seen before. And so we're seeing that various different groups are using this flexible shared signals framework to do their own kind of thing, and we would love to encourage that.
Thumbs up from Sean. Thanks, Atul. Anything else to add?
There's a question about BIA and standard banking APIs. I guess it's more about FAPI than shared signals, so I'll skip that.
That'd be great. Maybe Dominguez or can pick that up in the chat so we can continue on. We're quite tight on time, but certainly appreciate Sean and Atul joining us today. Thank you both. Next up is Joseph Heenan, who is the OpenID Foundation Standards Specialist and Certification Director, who's going to give us a quick overview of the OpenID Foundation Certification Program. I'll also note that Joseph, in addition to those background, is also an author of the FAPI 2 specification as well. So Joseph, please.
Great, thanks, Mike. So yeah, if we could go to the first slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the certification program today, and probably the first thing to say is certification means different things to different people. So in the case of OpenID Foundation certification, we're talking about certification of the protocols. So FAPI obviously being the most relevant one here. And it's what we call a self-certification program. So this is not a program where consultants come in and do stuff and you pay a lot of money for that. There's a tool that we host on the website. You log into it and you test your own implementation, and then at the end you just submit the results to us. So it's a relatively lightweight process. Obviously, the aim of the program is very much to promote high quality implementations of our standards and to make sure that people are actually implementing them securely and interoperably so that these ecosystems can scale well. And we've been doing this a long time now, almost 9 years for identity providers, 8 years for relying parties. So that will be the fintechs in an open banking context. And we've been doing this for FAPI since 2019, starting with UK open banking and then growing from there. Mike's going to talk about all the different ecosystems later. And all the certified implementations are listed on our website. So we've got an example of that on the next slide. no, we don't have, it's on the slide after, sorry. But yeah, so this is an example of the certifications listed on the website. So the listings are all public. There's different sections for FAPI 1 versus FAPI 2, and also because various ecosystems have profiled FAPI in different ways, there's different sections for Brazil and Australia and UK and SAMA, Saudi Arabia as well. Okay, so next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about why you'd actually want to use the OpenID Foundation certification program. These tests are all developed very closely with the working groups. So as Mike mentioned, I'm one of the editors of FAPI 2, so obviously that's a very close relationship, but the certification team also has very close relationships with the other working groups like Connect, and we've just started working with the Shared Signals working group as well. And anybody that's testing gets direct support from the OpenID Foundation certification team. We're all domain experts. We're familiar with the specs. And if we have things we're not sure about, we have pretty direct access to the spec authors, both within OpenID Foundation, and if it goes down to an underlying spec like the IETF OAuth ones, we have good contacts with some of the authors there as well. It's an internationally recognized program. It's been adopted by regulators across the countries I mentioned, like UK, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, and we've also seen it adopted by private ecosystems like the Connect ID ecosystem in Australia. It's a condition of participating there that you have to have passed certification. And these tests are all maintained and updated by OpenID Foundation by the team I lead. So we update them whenever there's new versions of the specifications. If we find potential security vulnerabilities or potential interoperability problems, we can update the tests to cater these things so that they just get better and better over time. And we also make sure that the test results are as easy to understand as we can. And one thing we quite often do is that we get quite a lot of feedback from testers about how the specs are actually working, how they've interpreted them potentially wrongly. And we feed that all back to the working groups, which then feeds into the specifications again to improve them. So next slide, please. So for these open banking and any other kind of open ecosystem to really succeed, they must be interoperable, they have to be secure, and they have to be scalable. And being interoperable is one of the ways that you can really make this scale. And if you test both sides of the connection, so we can test both the fintech and the bank and make sure that the sharing and the receiving party is both compliant with the standard, then that means when you try and connect people together, then things are much more likely to just work out of the box. So I mean, if you think about an ecosystem with just 40 participants who are both sending and receiving data, you've got over 1,500 different distinct connections there. And if you had to do some manual tweak to your software for each of those connections, your ecosystem's never going to scale. And it's really important that this kind of conformance testing happens before things actually go live. We've seen some ecosystems go live without requiring this kind of interoperability and conformance testing, and everybody just implements the standards wrong. And then it's very, very time consuming to actually try and fix things, because then you're breaking journeys for real users potentially, and you have to do a lot more testing. So getting it right first time is much, much easier for everyone. And OIDF we can engage at this ecosystem level like we are with the CMF to really make sure that people are following best practices from what we've seen on other ecosystems. So next slide, please. So just a quick update on the conformance programs we have. So we already have certification programs that cover OpenID Connect, OpenID Connect Logout and Session Management, FAPI 1 Advanced, the FAPI 2 Security Profile in its latest draft, FAPI 2 Message Signing that Domingos mentioned also in its latest draft, and also FAPI SIBA. We've got a whole bunch of tests under development as well. So for the verifiable credentials family of specs that are used by these digital wallets ecosystems that are starting to come up, The OpenID Connect for identity assurance that Mark mentioned, we've got some draft specs for those, and as that goes to final, we'll be brushing those specs up and bringing them up to date with the latest version of that spec. We're working on tests for OpenID Federation, which is something that is gaining increasing relevance in open banking ecosystems. There's a few that are looking to roll that out now. And we also need to start on tests for the FAPI 2 HTTP signatures that Domingos mentioned. And in the future, we need to look at FAPI 2 CIBA. And yeah, as I said, we're just starting on shared signals as well. So we'll have conformance tests for those hopefully later in the year. Next slide, please. So just to talk about the FAPI certification fee. So the fees vary depending on if you're a member of OpenID Foundation or not. So membership of OpenID Foundation, you have to pay annually to get that. You don't have to pay that to actually participate in the standards but development. But one of the advantages of joining as a member is that you do get these discounted certifications when it's only $1,000 for a certification, whereas for non-members it's $5,000. If you are a smaller organization or a non-profit, it actually works out cheaper to join as a member and get the members discounted certification fee than to pay the $5,000. So that's worth bearing in mind. And these kind of pricings are very competitive with the kind of thing we see for other standards bodies as well. So these aren't expensive, even if you're paying the non-member rates. So next slide, please. So here's some links for background. I know people don't actually have implementations that support FAPI live yet, so these aren't going to be terribly relevant, but they'll be here when you need them. The conformance suite itself, it's all open source on GitLab. So if you want to deploy it internally to your bank, you can download the source code, deploy it in a Docker container, test your internal systems before you actually put anything publicly live. The instructions are all on the OpenID Foundation website. There's also a version hosted on the cloud. So if the server you want to test is available publicly on the internet, or you can at least poke a hole in the firewall, the IP address is documented in the instructions, then you can just use our deployment as well. You just log in with a Git or Google account, and that protects your data so that other people can't see your test results. And if you need any help with that stuff, please just contact myself or the certification team. And that's me. Do we have time for any quick questions, Mike?
Maybe a quick question or two. Seeing none, hearing none, I'm going to recommend we keep moving since we are really tight on time at this point, and maybe pick up any in the chat and or if we have a few minutes at the end, Joseph. Thank you very much. Noting that we are very tight on time, I'm going to get through these slides very quickly. I'll invite Gail to make some comments here in just a second so that we can ensure that our special guest, Elsia Calefi, has enough time to talk about the Brazilian experience. As I mentioned, Gail, Domingos have highlighted a lot of our both government and private global partners. So this is kind of a quick overview slide. I'll move to the next one. I want to highlight a couple of things here. OBI was one of the first open banking implementation entity. Joseph was part of that. Joseph and Mark Hain were actually part of OBI. They do mandate annual certifications for the CMA9. We have great partners in Brazil, both in the Open Finance and Open Insurance groups. LCOs and Chicago Advisory are board members. I'll allow him to dive a bit deeper there. We have Open joining the board as well soon, so we're very pleased with that. We have both a relationship with the CDR in Australia, as well as Connect ID, which is a private ecosystem. Connect ID was one of the first to adopt FAPI 2.0 and helping us test those FAPI 2 tests before we put those into production. You heard Gail mention Saudi earlier. They adopted FAPI 1 Advanced, have gone through their first phase, but they're actually working on their phase 2, which is a transition to FAPI 2 in the second half of 2025. At that point, they'll mandate both FAPI 2 adoption and FAPI 2 certifications. Open Banking Canada, they're getting ready to release their mandate regulation later this year. It's leaning towards them selecting FDX or FAPI 1.0 as part of the FDX adoption in that regard. In Norway, adopted FAPI 2 within the healthcare network. Japan, Minibank, a private ecosystem there, adopted FAPI. We're obviously providing due diligence support to the CMF team in Chile. We'll continue to do so, thus the workshop today. And then I wanted to allow Gail to make a few comments on the state of what's happening in the US, because it's been quite active over the last few weeks before we turn it over to Elcio.
Yeah, I'll be super brief because Mark covered most of the recommendations we've been sharing with the CFPB already. We are all, I think, collectively anticipating the CFPB to complete its rulemaking in the next couple of weeks, and we imagine that Canada will release their guidance shortly thereafter. So we do have they do not disclose any of their plans in advance, but we have I suppose we think there's a higher possibility than ever before that they will name a highly secure communications protocol within their requirements, which would be a great improvement if they do so. I think the CMF is already on a stronger path in this respect, and so that's not a challenge for you. But we think that will be a great signal if the CFPB does make the security requirements a little bit more crisp in their regulatory mandates for the 10,000 banks in the US market. And we think that that'll probably lead to even further ripple effects, around the world as other countries pick up open banking and open finance requirements. So that's all I was going to add. Back to you, Mike.
Thanks, Gail. Very good. Noting that we are really tight on time, let's move on and pass off to Elcio Calefi. As I mentioned, as I was quickly working through those prior slides, Elcio, Open Finance Brazil, and Chicago Advisory Partners have been great partners over the last few years. So Elcio, please.
So good morning, everyone, again. I think the main purpose here of the agenda is to give you the landscape of what we are doing here in Brazil, the changes that the financial ecosystem are designing now. And this kind of phrase is like from our president of Central Bank of Brazil, Roberto Campos, that will be a great change on the financial landscape powered by technology. And how I say powered by technology, so a new payment rail as PIX, a new data rail as Open Finance, and a new digital currency rail that we call DREX here. The combination about these three enable capabilities here will reshaping and redesigning the way that the financial markets in Brazil are being designed for the next times here. So we can go ahead. So we will on the agenda we'll take these 4 topics and let's go. So what are on the agenda of all the regulators and all the companies here in Brazil? The technology transformation, the change of the mindset of the customer, the change of the channels that the customer are ready to engage, and the central bank propose is how these trends all together will shape our evolution on the ecosystem, and to create to maintain their principles, that is to bring a strong financial system, inclusive financial system, and a competitive financial system. So we can go on. So like I said, we are on the era of convergence, where text, payment, content, empowered by GenAI and something like that. We are moving we are seeing the movement of the customers, so the companies, so the persons, and how the financial ecosystem is designing to be a ecosystem that on the status, they need to be agile and current in transformation here. So when we are deciding to enable a new payment rail, a new data rail that is Open Finance, and a new currency rail that's Drex from Brazil that is on design system, on the design timing now. So this is the main landscape that we are working here in Brazil. All the banks, all the relying parties, and the participants of the ecosystem. So we can go on. This is, we can go this slide full. This is some kind of big numbers of Open Finance in Brazil, of PIX in Brazil, and DEX. So here in Open Finance, since the beginning of the data transfer being enabled in 2022, we have about 50 million consents current on the ecosystem. 123 billions of calls of our APIs in all ecosystem, and an increasing number of companies that are engaging in the ecosystem. This is a very huge ecosystem that's powered by our central bank. So what is our concern that we are doing with the standards and the patterns here? So the financial market in Brazil has already big investments on security, on technology, and we have to use all this capability, and we are building on top of it, respecting the things that we are doing, adding more security capabilities, as FAPI is one of the anchors of this security capability. So we can go ahead on this slide, Mike, please. So it's the name of the PIX. We try to take these numbers. Is this the more recent numbers here? Go ahead. And how we will be designing the DREX? How is the main agenda of the DREX? That is the digital currency here. So we can go on. So how we design the cybersecurity, that is our concern here on the agenda for the client-server communication here. So FAPI is one anchor of all parts of the ecosystem here. So since the server side and the client side it's a regulated place. So no one that is not in the regulated or the perimeter of the regulation of central bank is on the Open Finance ecosystem, and they already have the policies that they have to ensure and be compliance of this. So the central bank make a huge work here to maintain all the institutions on their risk assessment on the rails of the regulation here. When we bring Open Finance on top of the system and we design it, we think in many anchors. We think the consent management, we think in the PKI infrastructure. So we choose a national PKI infrastructure here that's already connected with the main standardized organizations on the world. We adopt the OAuth that was a huge pattern already tested on the world to be part of the consent management and things like that. We adopt the FAPI for on top of the OAuth and on top of the API to enhance our API communication here. We already create some toolings here to constantly monitoring the ecosystem. Three kind of examples here. We have the SOC team that is constantly monitoring all the security issues that are relating with the institutions here. We have the synthetic monitoring that we try to monitoring all the ecosystem here. on the board of the API gateway and some other thing like that. You have the conformance continuous validation that when the customer are in production, if they still continuous communication on the standard that we already designed and they have been certified before. So it's not a one-piece agenda to security. It's a multiple pieces agenda to security. And one part of it is the engaging of the institution, the client, and the server, that we have a truth anchor here in Brazil that enables that this communication between the two communications in a very secure and standardized way, trying to minimize the risks of security on the ecosystem. So is the main agenda of the portfolio of capabilities that we have on the security landscape in Brazil. Can you go ahead, Mike? Could you please give me 3 clicks here? So here is some kind of lesson learned that we try to cooperate with you and take with you. On the beginning of the things, when we adopt the FAPI here in Brazil, FAPI has some combinations of profiles that you can choose, and you can put it on place on the beginning. So we let this more open, so we can use variations of MTLS, private key, PAR, and JARM. What was the purpose on the beginning is to engage the server side of the things with their current security strategies to not deal with some big changes on their infrastructure. What's the downside of it? The client side of the things, the relying parties, has to build capabilities to integrate with these various kinds of profiles that FAPI allows here. So this is how we began, more democratic in some things of the standard here. What we moved the last year is to a reduced kind of profiles. So we, with the client and the customer, with the market here, the client in the server side here, we decided to adopt one pattern. The pattern that we adopt here is the private key job with PAR. So this is the single combination that on Brazil that is on place today, that we did the change management in the first trimester of this year. So what gave this to us? Everyone learned how to deal with it. So now we narrow the pattern of security here and have a more standardized and simplify the costs for each side to enable open finance in Brazil. So this is our current status on FAPI nowadays. When we did this movement to narrow some things, we already looked to the FAPI 2 profile and bring it to this new profile, the new Brazilian version of the profile here, some characteristics of the FAPI 2 profile. So we do not only narrow some things. We try to aim the FAPI 2 adoption in a medium term here in Brazil. This kind of decision of standards here to be more, to do not create some Brazilian standard and use it, it's to enable a vision of a cross-border and something like that that we can do with the other jurisdictions as that policy previews it. What's next here in Brazil? We are doing now a very big change in our payment rail in terms of security profile here. Like an example, we like a card on file experience that you had in your wallet will be account on file. You can connect our account to a wallet on the payment initiators agenda here. we can do a one-click Pix in websites and marketplaces, and then we can do a tap and pay with Pix by the wallets, the current wallets that is a payment initiator in Brazil. So this brings to us more challenging on secure. We know this. We add another another point here, that is the payment initiator here. So we bring more two patterns to enhance the security on Brazil. So we are adopting FIDO on the server side to enable the authentication of the customer and his device. And we adopt a shared signals framework here to curate changing information between the client and the server side here in the engagement of the account and the transaction here. So this is what we building here in Brazil in terms of security here. So Mike, I try to keep on time here.
Very much appreciated, Elcio. Any questions for Elcio? I know we're coming up on time quickly. I believe my colleagues have addressed all the questions in the chat, so I think we're good in that regard. Any questions from the room, Victor?
I just wonder if Elcio could give us more insight about the steps that in Brazil that are taken to, for instance, to adopt FIDO. We believe that, for instance, is a huge step that since they put it as a milestone, it could be very insightful as Elcio could give some examples of what's the kind of need or the requirement that the participants in the Open Finance Brazil look after to implement FIDO. Even FIDO is part of the standard a few years ago. And what is the developments that they are thinking to be part of this next goal in the evolution of the system?
If I understood correct, because the audio is very low, it's talking about the adoption of the on the payment rail here. What you are increasing on security with FIDO?
Exactly.
Okay, so in the payment now, with the payment initiator, if the customer account on file here, we are designing a pattern that has three parties involved here: the device, the payment initiator, and the account banking of the payment initiator. So we are adding some new concerns here to authenticate the device, and FIDO will have some kind of capability on it. I'm not a FIDO specialist, that you can, and John Bradley here is a FIDO member too, could help you in place here. We try to engage with the public and private communication between these three parties, and FIDO brings this capability to us.
Great, thank you, Phil, for your answer. And definitely will get out to John Heath here to ask him more about the FIDO.
Nam, you have a question with your hand raised, please?
Yeah. Good morning, Joel. Good morning, Elcio.
Morning.
We are Naum Rosinski from Banco Estado here. We are aware of dozens of Brazilian FAPI 1.0 profile certifications today, at least on your website, guys. And as you said, Elcio, you're working on you already launched a 2.0 version of the Brazilian profile of FAPI, right? So my question is very practical. Considering the level of adoption of FAPI 1.0 Brazilian profile and 2.0 Brazilian profile, what is the benefit of going through the process of a very low adoption today on embracing the standard FAPI 2.0 profiles?
If I understood correct about the adoption, we are in a specialized version here of the FAPI 1 advanced with some narrow on the profiles of authentication and authorization, and we adopt some new enhances of the FAPI 2 profile. Why didn't we go through the FAPI 2 straightly direct? Is because the size of our ecosystem and the change management and the things that we are prioritizing on the agenda. So we have the new payment capabilities and other things like that. So a big, huge transformation here for all partners on the server, on the providers, or the constraint was not the timing. We are not it was not in our main agenda on that time. So how can we aim this and bring a shortcut to something more close to the FAPI 2 profile, but do not enter in big transformation on the infrastructure of the participants. So it's because our large, because our prioritized agenda, and we have to deal with it on the last year.
Yes, I understand. Maybe I will make my question again. Maybe my question is more for the OEDF team, right? We have seen dozens of certified implementations for the Brazilian profile, right? Versus just a couple of certified implementations for FAPI 2.0, pointing to Australia implementation, right? Actually, as you presented, most of the final version of the published FAPI 2.0 specification is bound to the Australian implementation. So, considering the number of already certified implementations in Brazil, why shouldn't we embrace the Brazilian profile instead?
So I think that the reason to go straight to the FAPI 2 is that FAPI 2 is a simpler profile. So it very much takes the learnings that we have from rolling FAPI 1 out in the UK and other ecosystems and creates a simpler standard that's easier for people to actually implement. In particular, I think FAPI 2 is much simpler for the fintechs to implement. So it's much easier to scale your ecosystem. With FAPI 2 just moving to final in the next few months, we expect to see many more implementers kind of certifying their implementations. But the number of extra technologies you have to support to move from FAPI 1 to FAPI 2 is very minor. So we're not expecting it to be a huge amount of work for the vendors to actually uplift to FAPI 2.
Okay, makes sense. To be honest, we haven't seen that traction in terms of vendors, right? So the concern is there, right? The vendor traction, even FAPI 2.0 seems to be more complex to implement. The vendor traction is much more larger in 1.0 than in 2.0, even in the 2.0 version of Brazil. So that is the concern for OIDF actually.
Yeah,
I know what you're saying. It makes sense, but the vendor landscape doesn't match with the expectation.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm definitely aware of vendors that have implemented FAPI 2 but have not yet certified for it and are waiting for the final spec to be published so that they certify to that.
Okay, thanks.
Victor, we're losing quite a few people since we're over time.
Mike?
I don't. Yes.
Patricio here from BCI. I will. The question that Naum was asking, it's very interesting, and the answer from I forgot the person that was answering just now, but the answer is about that. Many vendors are waiting for the final published version. In terms of experience, how long do you think it will take for having more vendors certified for the final implementation, for the final version of the standard? How many months might take to have a big number of vendors certified? Well, I mean, I know it's you can't give me an exact answer. It's obvious. It depends on the vendors. But in your experience, what could we expect?
Yeah, I can take that one again if you like, Mike. So we're probably expecting fairly quick movement. So as well as the Australian Connect ID ecosystem that's already implemented FAPI 2, we're also expecting to see FAPI 2 probably be mandatory in Canada and possibly in the USA as well. That's still kind of a point of active discussion. SAMA, Saudi Arabia, have already indicated they're moving to FAPI 2. There's a Norway ecosystem that's for health, actually, that is using FAPI 2. So yeah, we're expecting all the major vendors to have support for FAPI 2 next year, basically.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Sebastián Galvez from BCI Seguros, and well, my question is about some of the concerns or question by Nahum and Patricio, and I don't know if the due diligence support that is happening on Chile is to implement the FAPI 2.0, right? I would guess that. And maybe my question is more for the CMF board about are we expecting to implement that? And what are the dates for that? Since what has been told, right, is that that implementation is still under reviews. I don't know how much changes can happen between reviews, right? And maybe that's a question to you guys too.
Victor, CMF team, do you want to take the mandate question?
Some thoughts about that. The idea is that the regulatory approach that we take this year should always be future-proof. So taking in consideration existing technological developments and the implementation timeline we set forth in regulation. So we know that several legacy or current implemented open finance systems wants to go ahead to FAPI 2.0, but there are current in place systems, so there's some kind of overhead to do that. And it's quite different if we took the position of a system that is built on a scratch and they need to take now a decision that will be implemented in the next years. And as you said on the presentations, we took the step to go forward to what kind of the standards acknowledge all the experience that other jurisdictions have before us. So this is what is the main premise we took the decision to go forward to FAPI 2. And for some of the concerns that we are embraced and try to be empathic with that concerns, we might take into account that, for instance, as I think Joseph pointed out, in UK and Brazil, many of the FAPI implementations started with implementers drafts even before the final FAPI 1.0 was released. So in terms of many of technical people know that, for instance, a lot of RFCs are even open for comments, but are still implementable. So our idea is to take the approach that it could be easy for the future implementation to go ahead to FAPI 2.0, and the idea to have this collaboration with the OpenID Foundation is to embrace the best practice in order to do that smoothly and in the best way possible. This is the thoughts I want to share.
And Victor, maybe we can move the question to the OpenID Foundation, so they can tell us if there are main issues of the framework, the FAPI 2.0, that are you're working on, and basically because what you mentioned in previous presentation, the final standard is expected to be finalized this quarter. So it looks like a good idea to see if you're working on main issues or just ironing out some details about it.
Go ahead, Joseph. I saw you come off mute, but I'll let you take that one.
Thanks, Mike. So yeah, I mean, at this stage, FAPI 2 is very much final. So the process in OpenID Foundation is that we, once we complete the work within a working group, and the working group wants to take it to final, there's then a 60-day public review period, and then there is a 7-day period where members vote on the specification to approve it. So we're just about to start that process. So that's why we're saying the end of the year, is because there's that 67-day period before the specification actually gets published. So I think that there's one or two editorial points we need to fix that got brought up in the final part of that submitting for the vote. But otherwise, the specification is stable. We've resolved all the feedback that we had in the working group. We're not expecting any significant changes, and in fact, I don't think there's actually been any what we'd call normative changes for probably over a year now. So a normative change would be one that requires someone to actually update their implementation. The work's been very much lately about trying to clarify the language and make sure the spec is as easy to read and unambiguous as possible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Victor, unless there's any final questions, since we're now 15 minutes over time, I'll recommend that we conclude.
Yeah, well, I think it's time to appreciate your time, and obviously look forward to continue this kind of conversation and work towards the successful implementation of FAPI standards in our regulatory landscape. So thank you again for this webinar and all the collaboration you made for that kind of activity seems to be possible to implement. So we're okay.
Great. Thank you for hosting us. And I'll be in touch with the links to the recording, so then you could share that with your ecosystem. Thank you all for participating today, and have a good day.
Thank you.
See you later.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Bye-bye.